Gwe Nindalawisin Gil, Danielle Gloade. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Gloade. I am the granddaughter of Nora Madeline Bernard. I just finished my master's at St. FX University. I am a full-time teacher in elementary. I teach grade 5-6 at A.G. Bailey in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. I wanted to share a little bit today about my grandmother's story. Her name was Nora Madeline Bernard. She went to the residential school. Growing up, she didn't really share too much with me about the residential school, but I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and I would often see people coming to her home. And my grandmother was a very humble woman, and she didn't have a whole lot of financial means. So when people would come, she would often make sure that they were full, they were warm. If she had her last $5, she would give it to them and make sure that they had gas money. So my grandmother was very generous, and I remember she had this little wooden kitchen table, and she would have stacks and stacks of files, and we weren't allowed to touch them. And I later found out that these were files of the survivors that she had meetings with, and they shared their personal stories and experiences and the trauma that they went through while at the Shubenacadie Residential School. My grandmother's story is one that seems to get overshadowed by the way in which that she died, and which makes me really sad because when I think about the first time I experienced the blanket exercise, we talk about all of these amazing and wonderful grassroots Indigenous people that have supported the push of realizing our culture and that bridge to reconciliation. However, the big piece that's missing is my grandmother's story and the work that she did. You know, like I said before, my grandmother wasn't a very wealthy woman, and she went to many lawyers and asking for support in recognizing that what happened to the Indigenous people was not okay, and the abuse that they went through. Because my grandmother was like, that what happened wasn't okay. And it wasn't until she went to one lawyer that he was like, okay, Nora, he said, I will do this for you. And it was only if she was willing to get the other survivors on board. So my grandmother was directly responsible and led the largest class action suit in Canada for the residential school survivors, which impacted and affected 78,000 residential school survivors across Canada, because once she created and started this movement, other people started to join, and other people started to join, and it started to grow and grow. She did this for many years since I was a young girl. I know in some articles it says like 14 years, but it was more like 20 years. She was constantly trying to figure out how to bridge that reconciliation. And I think one important piece about my grandmother's story is the lateral violence that that happened to my grandmother. Whether it was she was being, bullied from people who didn't receive the amount that they wanted to receive. So in December 2007, my grandmother was murdered by my brother. My brother had an addiction to drugs. He was led there because he was physically and sexually abused as a child within our own community. He started to use needles. That evening, he was on horse tranquilizers, Dilaudits, and coke and meth. And he went into her home and he asked for money. And my grandmother said, "Mohogwis," which means no, son. And he left. But he came back and he asked her again, and she was very upset because my brother has a son who he didn't even buy a Christmas gift for. And my grandmother knew that he was sick, that there was something wrong with him. And she loved him so much. Like, if he didn't show up at lunchtime, she would be calling around trying to find out where her Jamie is, And she was always worried. And kind of a testimony to that is when I purchased my first home with my partner at the time, my brother had broken into the home and stole all the copper wire out of the basement. And I remember calling my grandmother and I was like, Nanny, like James did this. And she's like, Dush, she said, you know, like your brother's not well. Like you have to forgive him. And I was so upset. I was like, Nanny, like I had to let her go because I couldn't believe that she was taking his side. But it wasn't until after that I started to understand the powerful, the impactful message, which was her legacy of forgiveness. So he went back into her home a second time and he asked her again and she said no. And with that, my brother punched her and she fell to the ground. And it's our understanding that she was unconscious at that time. And he went in the kitchen and he grabbed a knife and he slit her throat twice. This is part of her story. It's not the whole story, but it is important to share all of the pieces, not just the end piece, but all of it, because all of it helps us to understand the life and the legacy that my grandmother lived, and you know that her legacy still lives on today. I think that it's important to understand the work that she did, the message of forgiveness. You know, after my brother took her life and we found out what he did and it was him, I knew instantly that she forgave him. I knew that without a question. My grandmother, she wanted us as a nation to be able to move forward together and to forgive what the settlers had done to us, but to also have that acknowledgement and to start building that bridge of reconciliation. So today we honor December 6th, National Day of Action to End Violence Against Women. And I'm going to leave you today with a poem that my grandmother had written before her passing. And it's called A Person's Journey. Don't look back. It's all right to glance for just a second to see where you came from. But don't linger, wondering what could have been. What you will see is a lot of paths and side routes leading to where you are today. So look straight forward ahead to the road you are on today, because this road is so much longer and it's up to you of how hard or easy it's going to be. Believe it, for I have been there in my well-worn moccasins. Nora Bernard, Eastern Thunder.